We're big fans of MaRS, and I want to thank Linda for inviting us, and as well as Carrie Damon, who's here, and Krista Jones, the tech practice lead here, who invited us and set up this great event. And I also want to thank all of you for taking the time to be here. And I guess a special hello to whoever is in the other rooms, perhaps watching us on video this morning. So we have about 90 minutes together. Oh, there we go. And here's how we're going to spend it. For just under an hour, David and I are going to present the formal part of the presentation, and that'll leave about half an hour for questions. So lots of time for you to ask your questions and to get out of here even a little bit early if you think you need to. So our objective really is to help to provide a framework for PR in terms of your experience as entrepreneurs. Can I just ask how many of you, at least in this room, either have your own business or are considering starting your own business? Wow, pretty much everybody, that's great. Okay, so when David and I sat down to talk about how we would structure the presentation, we were thinking, okay, what are the kinds of questions you need to ask yourselves when you're starting your own business? What are the things that you need to know about, the viability or practicality of your idea, your product, your service, basic things. What is it? How do you define it? What is it you're going to be selling? Will it work? Is it viable? Will people accept it, understand it? Who will use it? Who's your target market? How do you make it? Are we talking about writing code? Are we talking about production? How do you sell it? How are you going to do your distribution and marketing plan? What support do you need? And that's in terms of third-party expertise. And finally, the critical success factors. These are exactly the same questions we're going to answer for you today about public relations. The what, does it work? Who uses it? How do you make it? How do you sell it? What are the critical success factors? What kind of support do you need? So that's basically what we're going to do. So the first question, what is PR? And we include this because although it may seem self-evident, actually a lot of people don't always know exactly what PR is. And I'm going to ask some of you in a minute, so you can be thinking about that. Before I do, I'll just tell you that if you're not completely sure, you're not alone. A lot of people still don't know what I do for a living. And my youngest daughter used to tell people that my job was to talk on the phone and gossip. So that's one interpretation of PR. But when you think of what public relations is, does anyone want to give me an idea of what they consider to be public relations?
Create buzz and spin it.
Spin. That's a favorite word, spin. Anybody else? Yes?
Get your story out into the media.
Get your story out into the media, absolutely. Anything else? Yes?
Be excellent and communicate that.
Be excellent and communicate that. I think that's a really good one. What we often hear, the buzz, the spin, the media, that's typically what people think of as public relations. That's really only the first piece of public relations. It's the one people most understand, media relations. But I think you were a little closer in terms of getting your message out, because you didn't say through what channel. So there are a number of different channels when you're dealing with public relations, a number of different publics. Media relations, of course, the objective is to work with journalists to get your editorial coverage for your company or your service. And I'm going to go through a few others. Not all of them are going to apply to you at your particular stage, but I think you need to be aware of them. Crisis communications, that's a really important one. If you find yourself in a difficult situation, this is high stakes, high risk, usually something that's rather urgent, where we're working on behalf of the client to communicate with a variety of stakeholders, basically to protect their reputation. In our business, it can be anything from a product recall to an employee crisis or a health and safety issue, lots of different things. There's government relations. At Hill & Knowlton, we have a completely separate practice for that. But again, a very important audience. And we'll work, or our government relations practice works with people to basically help them navigate public policy and procurement issues to their benefit with the government. Analysts. How many people work with, understand what an industry analyst is in the technology field? Couple? Okay. I know that not everybody in here is necessarily business to business, that some of you are business to consumer, you're selling to consumers. For the business to business audience, this is crucial. Industry analysts are market makers. They take, they pull data together, they do a lot of research, they distill it, and they sell it basically to your competitors, to your prospects. They have a huge influence with technology purchase decision makers on who, on what they think and what they'll put on a short list. Investors, probably near and dear to all of your hearts. It's the people that hold the money, and how do you influence their, the decisions they make about handing out that money. Finally, community relations. So it's about making sure that you have a positive impact in the communities that you live and work. And this is good not just for reputation, but also for employee engagement, employee recruitment, that type of thing. So clearly, there's a lot of different publics. It's not just about media relations. And I think the key here is to understand that public relations is not just about driving awareness, buzz, but also about trust and understanding, and driving that through a variety of different channels depending on your objectives. So, PR in science and technology has its own unique dynamic, shall we say. I personally think it's something that's a little bit tougher, and there's some other concepts that you need to be aware of. First is the complexity. If this was working, which it's not, it's this lovely little graphic where the balls fly and go all over the place, and it looks really complicated. But there are several reasons why we find a different dynamic in PR for technology. One is the subject matter complexity. I mean, a lot of what we find the companies that we work with are producing are behavior-changing technologies, creating new markets. And so those are things that the information really needs to be distilled and communicated in a way that's understandable for the audiences and digestible for the audiences. There are often a lot of collateral issues, whether it's ethics, health and safety, legislative, environmental. There's a lot of different issues that seem to tie themselves to biotech and technology and clean tech that need to be dealt with. There are a number of influencers, usually more than normal, because you're dealing at a variety of different levels, both public and private sector. Executive reputation, that's an interesting one. Of course, the reputation of the executive is important for any company, but particularly in small startups, we find that that's really the face of the company, because they don't have a track record yet. Their brand or their company doesn't have any kind of recognition yet, and so people want to know, who's behind this company? Will they be here in 3 or 5 years? Can I invest in this product or service and feel comfortable and confident? So we find that the reputation of the executive is extremely important. It doesn't have to be the CEO, it can be anyone, but someone within the organization that could be the face to that organization. And finally, breaking new ground. As I said, you're often changing behaviors. I mean, if you take the example of promoting a clothing line, like our consumer group might do, there's a variety of factors there, so size and style and fit and cost and whatnot, but nobody questions the value of clothing. We all use it, we all need it, it's an established market. I'll give you the example of a company we work with, and David will talk a little bit more about it in his part of the presentation. But it's a company called IMS, Intelligent Mechatronic Systems, a bit of a mouthful. They're based in Waterloo, and they focus on providing telematics products, so seatbelt restraint systems and airbag deployment sensors, that type of thing. We helped them launch a product called iLane, and iLane is a small device that sits in your car, and you basically sync up with your BlackBerry through Bluetooth, and you can read and respond to your emails while you're driving. So eyes on the road, hands on the wheel, processing your email. Talk about new behaviors. So this is something that some people find extremely valuable, like me, because I live 3 hours away from here. There's a lot of people that think that should never be done. It's not something we should be looking at doing. So when you're communicating on behalf of a company like that, there are a lot of different issues that you're dealing with, not just the speeds and feeds of the product. You have to deal with a lot of different public opinion, legislation, that type of thing. So, I think we've talked a little bit about PR and PR in the realm of your world slightly. So the question, does it work? Yes. I could just say yes and leave, but that probably wouldn't be enough. It absolutely works, and I think I could have give you all kinds of studies about it. There's been countless studies done. But I thought what would be valuable is, based on 25 years of running programs for clients and on the client side myself, is to give you an idea of some of the things that we've done for clients that shows that PR has value far beyond just the media coverage that you get. The first is generating demand. So, the classic awareness, interest, preference, purchase sort of cycle. This is particularly important on the consumer side, but we absolutely generate product demand through public relations, through product reviews and demos and all kinds of things. Distribution. We have actually helped a number of companies secure distribution deals based on the buzz, if you will, of the work that we've been doing. Partnerships, so sort of opening doors for companies to co-partner, co-market with other companies, perhaps advocacy groups, ways for them to enlarge their footprint or their profile. Prospects, this is particularly true in the enterprise world, so when we're dealing B2B, where we've opened doors on very large prospects that come in and end up doing business with one of our clients. Feedback, this comes to us through industry analysts, for example, that provide feedback on marketing plans, and other influencer groups, and it can be a great source of information as you're working on your own plans for marketing. Obviously government, a huge source of revenue for a lot of companies, and we've been able to open a lot of doors there. Recognition, awards. A lot of our clients, we either will advocate on their behalf for an award, or they'll be given an award based on the publicity and based on the other work that we've done for them. And funding, and I'm not talking here about startup funding, but second or third round VC funding. I was talking to one of the companies we work for, the CEO, a couple of weeks ago, I guess, and although 90% of their business is done outside Canada, they were working to secure a second round of VC funding here. And he told me that their funder here in Canada was really happy with the profile they were getting in Canada because it was providing air cover for them, and it made them look good. It made it look like they had made the right decisions in terms of where they put their money and where they invested. So again, another way for us to sort of be of value. So the two things that you need to remember about what PR does, it drives reputation and credibility. And those are two really important things when you're looking at building a company. And to prove that point, even though I said I wasn't going to bury you in statistics, I stole one slide from a very long deck of ours. Every year Knowlton does a technology influencer decision makers study. Now this is strictly business to business, this particular study, but I can tell you that these results are the same on the consumer side. And I know it's a bit of an eye test, but if you just look, I think I have a little laser pointer, just look on the left-hand side here at these numbers. Basically what it's telling you is the credibility and reputation of you as a supplier is as important as the product you sell and the support that you provide for that product. So when you think about that, how important that is, I mean, you put your heart and soul into developing something that you think is important, you work on the product, you work on the support and the service, but if you ignore the credibility and reputation aspect, you do yourself a great disservice because it will affect you in the long run. And the last slide before I hand it over to David is just, yes, we know that reputation is important. Where do your target markets go to make their decisions and form their opinions about you as a supplier? So just a list of sources of influence here, and these apply both to business and business to consumer. Sometimes the weighting is a little bit different, but there's a lot of different places people go for information. The first two, personal experience and word of mouth, trump everything. There's nothing stronger than a person's opinion if they've had a previous experience or a trusted friend's opinion. And that's the same business to business or business to consumer. Blogs and chat rooms is interesting. It's absolutely critical on the consumer side. And we're finding that online reviews and references are second only to word of mouth in terms of pushing consumer products. What we've found interesting in the last few years is that on the B2B side, at the enterprise level, so very large organizations, we have studies as well on this, but the C-suite are actually saying that they now use blogs and chat rooms, so consumer-generated media, not internet sites from companies, blogs and chat rooms to help make decisions about who they put on a short list, which is, it tells us how fractured this market has become in terms of influence. We talked about industry analyst coverage. This is particularly for business to business, but extremely important source. Internet sites. I mean, if anyone is looking to find out about someone, where do you go first? You go to the computer, you type it in Google, and you see what comes up. And an internet site is critical. Conferences and trade shows is also, allows people to kick the tires, get to know who they're talking to. And media coverage, so online, offline, trades, verticals, business, broadcast, whatever, all very important sources of information. And we also added financial analyst coverage because they either want to know if you're worth investing in or if you're going broke, basically. So all that to say that really, and all of the stuff I just presented, you know, the bottom line, reputation is extremely important. There are a lot of different sources of information that people go to make opinions about, to form opinions about you and your company. And PR plays a role in almost all of them. So now that the theory is kind of over, we know what PR is and how it works, I'd like to hand it over to my colleague David, who's going to take you through really how to apply it, how to make it, how to sell it, how to do it kind of thing relative to your experience as entrepreneurs.
Great, thanks, Mary. So really, we're looking at the central question of when and how to use PR. Now that's a pretty big question, actually, and as Linda mentioned, you know, in my career, I've been searching for some answers, and I think I found a few. I think you learn something new every day, but it's always a learning process. But even if you have no experience in PR right now, not to worry, we're going to break things down into some very basic principles. And if you do have some experience, maybe it'll be just some reminders for you in terms of what you should think about more, or what you should focus on in the future as well. All right? So the first thing I really want to mention is that PR can play a role at every stage in the evolution of your business, right? Whether you're pre-launch, whether you're ready to launch, and after you've launched a product, right? The key, I think, to that is making sure that you're applying PR, okay, in the right way, for the right purpose, at the right time. And doing this will help make sure that you're actually getting the best results out of PR. You're having the greatest impact on your business that PR can deliver for you, all right? So again, let's break this down into 3 stages. The first one is building your foundation, all right? This is all about preparation. So this is before you've even necessarily gone out publicly or launched a product, right? We want to make sure that you're ready to communicate with the marketplace, right? And so there's lots that there's a lot that has to happen before you're ready to do that. The second phase is launching your brand, all right? So that's about engagement, okay? That's about establishing relationships with those influencers that Mary talked about that will have an impact on your brand, have an impact on your corporate reputation, and ultimately influence other folks in terms of what they think about you, what they write about you, what they believe about you. And that can be both a perception activity as well as an action item in terms of will they buy your product or will they not. The third stage is maximizing your momentum. And that's really about the energy, all right? Do you have the energy to get out there and commit to PR for the long term? Because oftentimes, common mistake is you go out, you launch a product, and oh, then you go silent for 6 months or longer. And all of that silence is actually a huge step backwards in terms of making sure that you're influencing the right people in terms of what you want them to believe about yourself and your product. So building the foundation, let's go deep here. Now, there's going to be a lot of content here, so we're going to try and go methodically through it, but in terms of building the foundation, there are really 3 key areas that we want to focus on. The influencer map, key messaging, and content development. All right, so let's go into each one. The influencer map. As Mary mentioned earlier, there are lots of folks out there that can have something to say about you. It could be journalists, analysts, bloggers. Maybe it's a CFO, CIO, or an academic. So essentially, all these people either are saying something about you, have an opinion about you, or can influence the opinions of others. And ultimately, maybe their buying decisions or other attitudes that they may have, right? So the key here is to identify, profile, and prioritize those influencers. Because if there are a lot, you know, it's kind of that cliche of trying to boil the ocean, right? And so if you can determine who are, you know, the most important, the ones that will have the most immediate impact on your business, then that will really help you to actually have the maximum impact that you can possibly have. And Mary mentioned IMS before. They're actually a really good example of that. Essentially what happened was they came and one of their key business objectives was to establish new distribution deals in the US, the UK, and Canada, right? And so we understood that the influencers that would help that were industry analysts, business journalists, as well as vertical journalists in automotive or telecommunications. And so because we mapped that out and focused on those influencers, we got them the right coverage, right? And we also got helped them to open doors to meet with distribution partners in each of those geographies. And so that's the importance of influencer mapping. Right? let's move to key messages. What is the key message? All right, well, it's a simple, concise, and informative statement about yourself. All right, it's about how you're different, the value you deliver to customers, why you're special, why you're unique. All right. It's also integrated into industry trends and issues. So, is there something broader that's happening that can add greater significance, greater relevance to your company, to your product? All right. And finally, that integration of those two things, your messaging with an issue or trend, will really help generate news value, create news value and storylines that you can take out to influencers. Yes, media, bloggers, analysts, and a range of other ones as well. Right? What are some of the deliverables here? I mean, the one thing that we often recommend for our clients is actually developing a key message matrix. All right? And so essentially that's a one-page script, if you will, of all the key statements about yourself, all those messages that you want your audiences and those influencers to know about you, right? And essentially, it really helps to ensure actually that we're literally all on the same page. So all your executives are saying the same thing about your company in the same impactful way. And that actually helps, shall we say, prevent or minimize executives from going rogue and saying stuff that they shouldn't be saying, and maybe coming out with the classic, oh, I was misquoted or I was taken out of context. The key message matrix can really help to mitigate that and avoid that eventuality. A key driver or a key result that can be produced from the key message matrix is what we call, in our sort of internal language, a story pitch book. And so that's very similar. What are the 3 or 4 or 5 topics that are really near and dear to your heart, that relate to your business, that we can take out to the marketplace, right? What are the storylines that you want your audiences to know about you? And so those are also very related. And finally, what we call, again, internally, the rude Q&A. This is about preparation. So this captures or tries to anticipate all the questions that you might be asked by an influencer. And a lot of these are pretty standard ones. About your company, about your product, what are the feature sets, who is it targeted at. But it can also be some of the more delicate ones, or maybe some of the more nastier ones, right? Because as we know, some influencers, some are supportive, some are quite skeptical, right? And so you have to be able to address the skeptics that are out there as well, and a rude Q&A can help you do that, right? And actually, one example, again, going back to IMS, is that, as Mary mentioned, they had that issue of driver distraction and safety in terms of the use of electronic devices in vehicle. And so we helped them with their messaging to make sure that not only were they prepared to address that, but they could also almost piggyback on it to use that as an opening, as a platform for them to deliver the good, positive messages about their product and their solution sets overall. Okay? So what's the key element here and the takeaway we want about key messaging? We want you to be authentic, believable, and credible. That's the real purpose of key messaging. Let's move into content development. Now this is, again, a pretty big area, so let's walk through it. Essentially, most people think of PR and they think about the traditional press kit, right? So what goes into a press kit? Well, it's all these things, right? A press release, a corporate backgrounder, executive bios, product fact sheet, FAQs. All these are kind of the documents that sort of the basics that you want in there. The one thing I'll mention about B-roll, just in case if you're not familiar with the term, essentially it's video footage, which can be used obviously for television broadcast outlets as well as online, right? Essentially, for one client, again, with IMS, as we're sort of talking about them a lot right now, is that essentially we did shoot some B-roll for them, and that really helped in 2 ways. One, it helped us do some outreach to some television broadcast outlets, but it also helped us because their manufacturing wasn't quite up to speed yet in terms of full production, and so we didn't have a lot of units in hand to hand out to people, basically. And so what this allowed us to do was to actually show the device in action in a short, simple, easy way, right? And so they could repurpose it for the website, and that again would help other influencers to see how the product worked, right? And so that takes us to, as what Mary said, the website. Now again, I'm sure you guys, we all surf the web, and I think we all know what websites we like and we don't like, but we did want to just cover off some of the key things again. Oh, sorry, it's sort of a bit dark there. But essentially, what are the key content areas of the website that you need? An About Us section, a newsroom, company information. That's all really important stuff. All these areas are some of the basics of what you should have on your website. I think the key point here is that it's got to look professional. As Mary said, that it's often the first place, if not the first place, that an influencer or an audience member will go to check out you, learn more about you, right? And so, put it this way, it's got to be easy to navigate, it's got to be intuitive, because if it's not, right, that impression, that negative impression, can really last a long time. And so that's something you really should think about and devote the time to it. Oops. And what's the key takeaway for all of this content development? We want to make sure that it's accurate, consistent, and compelling in all your offline and online materials, all right? And what's one way to do that? What's a trick to do that? Well, it's about leverage. So the materials that you create for your press kit or your website can be leveraged into all of these documents, whether they're corporate materials or marketing materials as well, all right? The key here is to reuse, the 3 R's basically, to reuse, recycle, and repurpose the content as much as you can. That ensures a unified voice, right? So that your marketing brochure doesn't look completely different than what's on your website, right? Or an executive speech or investor presentation is completely out of whack with your product fact sheet, right? So that's all got to be consistent. I also want to spend a bit of time on the press release, all right? That's so often the PR in PR. I mean, that's a common association, and it is an accurate one. A press release is a big thing of what PR is about. So, has anyone written a press release themselves yet? All right. You all fancy yourselves writers? Yeah, good writers? Okay. So, I want to leave you with a couple of big tips about this. And I go back to my days in journalism school and my time as a journalist. All right. Use what we call the inverted pyramid when you're writing your press release. All this means is putting the most important information, the most interesting information, at the top. Don't bury it down 5 paragraphs, all right? Because you want to create news value with it, right? I mean, so rather than going on some ad nauseum flow, stream of consciousness about speeds and feeds, think about business impact. Think about the customer need. Think about the impact this will have on user behavior. Maybe it's a customer win that you're focused on. So think about it in those terms, an inverted pyramid that creates news value. Similarly, know your audience. If you are going out to a business audience, hey, surprise, surprise, lead with business objectives and business needs. Don't focus on megabits per second on this, that, and the other thing, all right? I do want to spend a moment on email or Newswire. Now, again, those of you who have written a press release, you may have distributed it on a newswire, commercial service like CNW, Canada Newswire, or Business Wire, or PR Newswire. Those have its role, right? They, of course, charge you by the word, and they charge you by the distribution list that you use, right? But if you have, for example, regulatory or disclosure requirements that you have to get it out to everybody at the same time, obviously a newswire can be the way to go, right? Similarly, if you want to just get it out there broadly in a shotgun fashion, maybe there are some portal sites that might pick it up. Maybe some specific sites like Globe Investor or Market Watch what might pick it up. That's one, another useful role for it. But if you have a very targeted audience that you're trying to reach, maybe an email might do it. It's kind of cheaper, faster, maybe even more personal. So just again, know who your audiences are, know who your influencers are, and that might dictate how you distribute your release. And I also want to leave you with some alternatives. You don't always have to do a press release, all right? Like, you can think press release, but it's not always the case. Again, we talk about story pitch emails. Essentially, that's like a 2-paragraph email that sets up an issue and relates your product to that issue, right? Maybe it includes a quote from your executive, right? And that can be done fast, it can be distributed broadly. It allows you to react to the marketplace a lot faster than maybe going through the full process of writing a press release and getting it approved through legal and everybody else, right? And one example of that is actually a client of ours called Message Labs. They're part of Symantec now. They're an email and web security software vendor. Obviously, of the tragedy in Haiti, that was, I guess, 8 days ago now, 9 days ago, that spawned a lot of bogus emails, bogus fundraising emails of, donate to Haiti victims and survivors. And so one of the executives at Message Labs posted a note on his blog warning people of this, right? Like saying, watch out for these mails that are subject line this because they're bogus, and so obviously donate money to them. And so what we did is we took that blog posting and converted it into a story pitch email. Talked about the issue, demonstrated how Message Labs had solution sets that could address it, and also got it out there really quickly to capitalize in some ways to let people know. It's almost like a public service so that people wouldn't unwittingly go about donating money to these bogus organizations. And so that actually generated news right away because obviously even CBC.ca ran a piece because they wanted people to know about this. Right? So again, the key thing about this, try not to bore people with your press release, right? That's the most important thing. So that was an awful lot of content. So we want to run through a quick checklist here in terms of all the things you should think about in building the foundation for your PR efforts. Right? First one is an influencer map, a key message matrix, a rude Q&A, a story pitch book, press kit materials, website content, corporate documents, marketing collateral, a press release, if applicable, story pitch email, and think about your distribution channels, all right? So that's a lot of stuff to think about, but again, afterwards, lots of time for questions if you want to explore any of these in more detail, or maybe take them to the next step as well. So we want to move on to the next stage here in terms of what you do in terms of preparing for PR. We're talking about launching your brand now, all right? This is, as I mentioned, it's about engagement. It's about executive visibility. It's about influencer relations. And it's about social media, of course. All right? So with executive visibility, it really is a team effort. All right? Often we know that CEOs and founders, they're busy. They got a lot to do. They're running the company, basically. Right? And so we really recommend that there be a cast of characters. So it could be a CEO. It could be a VP. It could be a product manager. Whoever that is, we really want a series of people who can speak to your company. And maybe we divide that up. Maybe there's a certain set of key messages that the CEO delivers. Maybe there's another set of key messages that the product manager delivers, right? This allows us to do a couple of things. One, they're available to speak to influencers when need be. And plus, it allows them to focus a little bit more on the subject matter that they really need to know about. Because clearly what we want is some confidence and some passion in what you're talking about, right? And so if the CEO is really focused on the business case, let him or her focus on that. But if there's more of a technical side of things, let the product manager focus on that, right? And so what we recommend often is a spokesperson matrix, all right? So that essentially maps out who the 4 or 5 or 1 or 2 approved spokespeople, and that's a key thing, right? You don't want everybody out there talking to everybody about everything. So are there approved spokespeople there, and what are the topics that they can speak to? And that can really be helpful in terms of defining everybody's role in the organization. And we do know that everyone's not, shall we say, a natural spokesperson. And so there is some training in terms of learning some skills and techniques that can help you become a better spokesperson to effectively deliver those messages, all right? And again, one good example is a company we work with called Verisent. Essentially, they make sales performance management software, so it's a fairly specialized software category, let's say. And it was a bit of a tough sell to certain influencers. But what we actually did was set them up with the Globe and Mail to talk about a larger issue, which was how Canadian startups can acquire venture capital money. So it was more of an industry issue type pitch. That was the platform. And what happened there was, not only was the journalist very interested in speaking to the executive about that, he was so impressed that this journalist, who happens to also be a professor in the Faculty of Management at McGill, he actually invited the CEO to be a guest lecturer at McGill. And so that really gave another excellent platform for the executive to tell the corporate story. Right? The next key area is influencer relations. All right? So How do you go about doing this, right? Well, from a strategic perspective, it's about being personal, creative, and flexible. So personal, right? It's like any interpersonal relationship. Be interested, know what the person is interested in, what the blogger is writing about, what the journalist is covering, what the analyst is what research the analyst is working on, right? So it's about knowing that and focusing on their interests, right? It's about being creative. Again, that Verison example. Again, we weren't talking about sales performance management software. We're looking for another way in to give us a chance to tell our corporate story, right? And frankly, it's about being flexible. That's a very practical thing because often we've had experience where a company will issue a press release, but then their executives aren't available to speak to any influencer after the fact, right? And let's just say that if you're inviting somebody to the dance and you stand them up, nobody likes that, right? Especially a journalist or an analyst. They don't like to be stood up by a vendor, right? And so it's really important that you're able to make the time to speak to folks on their terms, on their turf, right? So that's critical. And from a tactical perspective, what does this mean? This means that you can create a whole bunch of series of storylines that can be targeted at each of these audiences, right? And how do you do this? Well, again, this is a bit of a laundry list, and we can talk about them in more detail certainly, but as Mary mentioned, the industry analysts are important, so you got to pre-brief them. Often we recommend pre-briefing the analysts so that they're ready to go when you're ready to launch, so that you have a third-party independent source that can offer, hopefully, favorable comments about your product and service to anyone who wants to know, right? Media tours, influencer luncheons, conferences, and a product demo program it can be helpful as well. So certainly on the B2C side, if you have a consumer-oriented device, a product demo program can really work well. You just simply get your product in the hands of influencers. Let them test drive it yourself. And that alone can help generate some good coverage and again, help influence other people in terms of the perspectives they have on your product. Okay, social media. There are entire multi-day conferences about social media, right? I think MaRS is putting on some, has and will continue to put on some. And so we're not going to be able to get into a forensic analysis of social media right here and now, but obviously it's a big one that we do want to talk about. Let me just say one thing. PR clearly has a role in social media. PR has always been focused on creating and exchanging information, right, with a variety of influencers. And that's, I think, in essence, what social media allows, right? It's a rich environment that allows that exchange to happen. And so when you look back in terms of what are some of the basic principles in dealing with interactive media, right? Like, yes, Twitter and Facebook and all the other tools, they really are changing some things. But there are some, I think, some basic fundamentals that we can still follow and that can guide us. And this goes back, well, 10 years, I guess. I mean, as Linda mentioned, I did co-found what ultimately became our digital communication service at Hill & Knowlton. And back then it was pre-Facebook, pre-Twitter, right? Pre-WordPress. We were focused on vanity sites and zines, right? And Usenet news groups, right? There was all that kind of stuff. But what we did learn though is that one of the key principles that you have to figure out is, are you joining or are you going to start a new conversation? And that difference can actually determine, you know, the strategies and the tactics you apply in your social media campaign, right? A key principle is to listen, watch, and monitor what's going on, right? I mean, if you don't know who's saying stuff about you, how are you going to know how to respond, or even if you want to respond at all, right? What are some of the high-level plans and policies you should put in place? For example, are you going to have a rule that employees can't blog about your products, or certain individuals can blog about your products, right? Who are you going to allow to do that or interact with the social web? And finally, what level of commitment are you prepared to make? Is it simply a blogger relations program where you want to go out, see some product, talk to some folks, or do you yourself want to commit the time and effort and energy to engage in the social web, right? And don't underestimate the time commitment that could take. And finally, transparency. I think we all know this. We've all heard about you know, the corporate PR dude who's out there on the blogs commenting or responding to criticism, and then they get exposed, right? That, that's death, right? If you're not fully transparent on the social web. So again, that's a lot of material on launching your brand. So I want to quickly run through another checklist, all right? When you're launching, think about that executive spokesperson matrix. Think about key message delivery training. Think about making your executives available. Think about story pitches. Think about doing some analyst briefings. Think about media tours. Think about influencer luncheons and a product demo program that applies. All right. And certainly on the social media side, think about monitoring. Think about plans and priorities. And think about blogging and podcasts if that's applicable for you or something you can commit to. All right? So now, the final stage here, maximizing your momentum. And what does this mean? As I mentioned, it's about energy, all right? It's about having the energy and the persistence and the patience to stay active and making sure that you're out there and maintaining that conversation with all those influencers, all right? And how do we do this? We really do it in 3 ways. Customer case studies, right? Showcasing the value of your products, right? In a business or customer perspective, using the customer voice to do that. It's about thought leadership, right? Showcasing the knowledge and experience that you have in the industry that you're in, right? And finally, it's about the milestones. What are the corporate achievements that have happened in the company that you can really seize upon and maybe make a storyline out of, all right? I want to share with you another example of ours. A company called Springboard. They're Toronto-based, and they make a really cool product called Concierge. Essentially, it's a touchscreen computer console that attaches right to the shopping cart handle. So it's got like a product finder, so when you're cruising up and down the aisles, right, you can, if you're, where is that product, you can actually find it. There are digital coupons on it. There are special promotions, so it's actually an advertising platform as well. There's also self-checkout technology on it. So this is something that's, really quite, can be quite useful for folks. And so what we did is, since Springboard now had this customer reference on site and ready to go, it was actually a major US grocery retailer in the Southeast. And because they had achieved this key milestone, we could now kickstart their PR. They had actually launched the product a few years ago, and then they went quiet for a bit because they were focused on manufacturing and business development. But because they had achieved this customer win, we were able to write a press release in almost a case study fashion, where we did lead with the business impact, the business benefits, and the issue, essentially the transformation of the shopping experience. Walking down, the grocery store and obviously getting all the specials right away and getting out there faster, getting out of the store faster. So that whole issue was wrapped up nice and neatly into a customer reference, right? And that really, when we focused on a few things, these business benefits, it really made a difference in terms of the number of influencers we were able to reach out to, because they also wanted to get out to more people than just the grocery retail vertical market. They wanted like mainstream computer coverage. They also wanted business and technology coverage as well, right? And we did just that. Because of this customer reference, we were able to actually get them on Canada AM. So the CEO, we hauled the cart, like the physical cart with the computer, hauled that into the studio at Canada AM, and the CEO had like a 6-minute spot with Beverly Thompson where he demoed the product, showed the applications on it, and so that was obviously a great piece for them. Also, because we shot B-roll for them, we got them on the CBS Early Show. So we could see, pushing the cart up and down the store aisles with stocks, shelving, with all the products there. And so that was really important. The other key area is thought leadership, right? And there are the 2 things I want to focus on, first of all, are Speakers Bureau. So that's the classic circuit, right? So if you're at industry conferences, what keynotes can you be a part of? What panels, what seminars can you be sitting on? And that happened with Springboard as well. They were actually at the In-Store Marketing Expo in Vegas, and the CEO sat on a panel talking about future trends in retail, right? And so we helped them develop messaging, a Q&A, a rude Q&A as well, in the sense of helping to establish the thought leadership there, right? What are some of the byline articles that you could write that address an issue or trend? And these articles can certainly be placed in some publications that accept them. They can also be repurposed for your website. Again, that leverage, using the content over and over again. And certainly they can also maybe be used in partner websites as well. E-newsletters is another idea. So if you're out there communicating with partners or customers, can you contribute more content to it or to a partner's newsletter, right? Again, to help build out the awareness and education about your products. And finally, again, back to the social media side. What blogs, what podcasts might you be willing to actually commit to, all right? So just to wrap it up, really in summary, what are these milestones, whether they're corporate achievements, whether they're customer wins, whether they're new partner engagements? All of this stuff constitutes the raw materials that we can use to generate some news, essentially create some more news value for you, right? Or at the very least, it can help engage some other influencers in terms of what you're doing. And so with that, I mean, we'll go through our final checklist, all right? Think about customer case studies. Right? Think about Speakers Bureau. Think about byline articles. Think about e-newsletters, blogs, and podcasts. Okay? And so when you do that, all these milestones will be able to be reflected in all of those key tactics. All right? Okay, so again, a lot of content. Hopefully it wasn't too overwhelming, but again, we've got a lot of time for Q&A, so we can go deeper on any of these, or maybe even take them further if you've done some of them and want to know the next step. All right? And so I'll now hand it back to Mary, who'll talk a little bit about what it's like to work with an agency. All right?
Thanks, David. So I won't have too many checklists for you. I'll go through them myself. Linda wanted us to review sort of, working with an agency, and you might not be at that point yet. But the first question we usually get asked when we think about this is when? When do you invest? Like, when is the right time for you to start thinking about getting some support? And I guess the easy answer would really be, when the upside warrants it. What does that mean? You have to think about where you're at in terms of your company and what you want to achieve. And I find that there's certain junctures, if you will, when it does make sense to invest, and when having a professional help you will make the difference. The first one would be when you're creating your marketing plan and kind of determining your story. As David talked about, foundation is so important. It's critical to get your story right. So having someone come in that can help you do, say, a key message session, where if Hill & Knowlton was running a key message session, we would go and do a competitive review, who's talking about what in your industry or your product set, sit down with the executives and work through what your story should be, sort of battle test that a little bit, vet it, and then you end up, the deliverable is actually a messaging matrix. But the value for that goes far beyond that piece of paper, because it's something upon which you will build a lot of your other documents and a lot of your other work. So that can sort of be purchased as a one-off from an agency, and it doesn't require you to be engaged on a long-term basis. The next thing might be when you're ready to do your first big media push. So do you have something, are you launching your product? Are you launching your company? Is there some major milestone that you want to go out and do a broad media push? Again, having a professional or an expert that has those media relationships that can do that groundwork for you is really helpful. It just is more efficient. And not only can they make those contacts, but they will go with you, and they can help navigate and make sure that you're giving the right messages to the right audiences. They follow up with the journalists after. They help you sort of get those stories placed. So that's another juncture, and frankly, that's another thing you can do as a one-off if you define what you're looking for. And the last area would be sort of establishing a presence. So if you've been doing a fair bit of work and you're out there in the public realm, it makes sense to have some sort of an ongoing relationship, because if you have news on a regular basis and a reason to share it, it makes sense to have someone help you do that, because it can be fairly time-consuming. So a couple of things to think about there. This is a big question, budget, and we get asked this all the time. How much should I pay? How much should it cost? And the answer is that it really does vary, and I'll explain why in a minute. I'm going to go through a couple of key tactics and explain what goes into them. And I will give you a price, but again, it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. I think first, though, it would be helpful to give you an idea of how you engage with an agency, different ways under which you can engage. The first would be a retainer model, and this is the one that people are most familiar with, I think. It's basically a set price that you pay per month regardless of the level of activity. You're working against a key set of deliverables, but that amount is billed no matter what. And we see this often, government relations, where the value of the work being done is not based on the hours or the time it takes, but the access or the information they provide. Or in a crisis situation where you're paying to have a company and their experts on standby 24 hours a day, and to be updating your crisis manual and doing that kind of thing. So those kind of services, I would think in your situations, it's the least valuable for you at this point. The next model is discrete pricing. So what I talked about in terms of having a one-off project. So being able to engage a company to do the messaging for you, to do a media event, maybe a trade show, maybe even some writing, case studies or other things like that. And it's very valuable to you because you can bring people in as and when you need them to support you. I would say in the long run, if you have a fair bit of work to do, it's better to move to something more consistent because you tend to lose the momentum that you get by doing these projects. Because what you don't do with project-based is empower the agency to do work for you proactively. So that brings us to the next one, a drawdown, which would basically be a purchase order that's open. So say a client comes to us and they say that we want to launch on this day. And we say, great, give us a PO for 6 months. These are the activities that will be covered. So we spend a month or two prepping, as David talked about, all those foundational things. We help them with the launch. And then we're engaged for a couple of months after to be able to proactively and reactively go to the media that we've talked to. Look at an editorial calendar, which publications will give you, to say, this month we're going to focus on this topic. Pitch those stories and maintain that momentum. So while it's very clear what needs to be delivered, it also gives a little bit of leeway for an agency to actually do some work to make sure you're leveraging what you've spent. So that's another option too. Now in terms of actual costs, people will say to me, what does a press release cost? When you think about what's required to do a press release, so you need to have it written. You decide what it's about. You need to get it written, as David said, properly. You need to have that approved, depending on how many people are involved. Do you have lawyers? Do you have third parties? Do you have partners, investors that need to approve it? You may need to get it translated if it's going into Quebec. You have to decide who you're distributing it to. Is it going on the wire? Is it going to a group of people that you have to identify? You need to distribute it. You need to do call downs. We need to call the people we distribute it to. The chances of getting coverage without doing call downs is next to nil these days. And then you need to monitor for coverage, and you need to report on that. And you have to know whether you're going to do it just in Toronto, just in Ontario, nationally, internationally. So all of those variables really has a huge impact on what this is going to cost. I can tell you that if you were looking for assistance on a basic press release that was going to be issued to a limited, by email, a limited number of people, it could be about $3,500, including the follow-up, and then it would go up from there. So if any of you have a specific question later that you want to ask me about, that's fine. I'm trying to give you a basic guideline, but it really is a case-by-case basis. Another example would be a media tour. Again, you need the strategy. You need to decide who you want to talk to. You need to have your content and your platform. You need to approach those media. You need to set up those meetings. You need to have someone on site when you're doing them. You need to do briefing books for the spokespersons and train them. You need to follow up with the media to embed the story. A lot of things. And then again, is it regional? Is it whatever? I can tell you, say if we were doing 3 to 4 media here in Toronto, with a platform and messaging that you guys had already developed, it might be around $4,000 or $5,000, and then it would go up from there. So it gives you a little bit of an idea. In terms of agency support, also, you have to think about what to look for. So my experience, I was actually 20 years on the client side before I came to agency. So I worked for startups, I worked for Fortune 500 companies, I worked with small agencies, big agencies, and I actually had my own consultancy for a while as well. And what I found was there are 2 or 3 things that really shone through, and I still look for those, and I look, frankly, to try and deliver those for my clients as well. First is flexibility, and it's all about being able and willing to deliver those discrete projects that I was talking about. But not just from a tactical standpoint. So some agencies I've dealt with say, yeah, we can issue that press release before. They don't ask me any questions. How do they know what it is I'm trying to get out of it? They're just thinking about the tactical piece of getting it on the wire. So you want to look for someone that asks a lot of questions up front, understands your business before they take any project, small or large, from you, that they understand what you're trying to achieve. By the way, I would also recommend a contract, no matter what you're doing. A small contract, it's a bit of a lightning bolt or a lightning rod, I guess, to make sure that the expectations are very clear. You may think they are, but once it gets written down, it's sometimes different. So I always recommend a short contract. The next is scalability. So this is really the ability to grow with you. And for small companies like yourselves, it's really important. I have a philosophy called one throat to choke, which is basically, you know, if someone engages Hill & Knowlton here in Toronto and we work on their business and we've invested time and money in understanding them, they shouldn't have to redo that in every region they're going to. So we take responsibility, like with IMS and others. When we launched iLane, it was simultaneously in here, in the US and in Europe. And the client only ever dealt with our team. So it's very efficient, it's very, it saves a lot of cost, and it allows you to focus on what you do and not have to reinvent the wheel every time you're going to another area, another region. And the last is expertise, which I think is fairly evident, you know, but you do want someone who understands your business, because it can be quite a steep learning curve. And I would also say, I mean, David touched on passion. You know, if people don't, in the end, it's a people business. We pick up the phone, we smile and dial on your behalf. We are representing you to other people. If we're not passionate about it, if we don't understand what you do and we don't get it, we're not going to get the same result. So, you know, look for people that really understand and like what you're doing. And the last thing is measurement. An agency should be able to measure appropriately. So what does that mean? People say, you know, what can I expect from my PR? Well, in terms of measurement, I think there's two sides to it. You, as the person that's hiring the agency, need to be very clear about what you're hoping to achieve. And then it's the agency's responsibility to develop some sort of measurement that will align to that. Now, having said that, we can measure anything if you have enough money. So there's consumer packaged goods companies that spend hundreds of thousands of dollars just measuring things like buying intent and brand preference. And that's really not where we want to go. So when you're setting your expectations, you need to be realistic. At the other end is really the most simple form of measurement, which is basically what's called impressions. So it's basically the number of eyeballs that have the opportunity to see your coverage based on that outlet circulation, online or offline. So you'll see, you know, someone will say, oh, we did this program, we got 30 million impressions. That doesn't mean 30 million people actually read, because that would mean almost everyone in Canada read about you, which would be great, but it means there was 30 million opportunities for people to have read about you. Based on the distribution of that particular piece. And that is the cheapest, easiest way to establish measurement around media coverage. And we obviously do that as well. We do other things for our clients, though, and you might want to consider, you know, we often will look and say to a client, what's really important to you? So we will measure not just based on impressions, but was it the target publication? So we only want to measure in these 10 target publications or outlets because they're the most important to you. We want to look at how often and which key messages were embedded. We want to know, did your spokesperson actually get quoted? We want to know what the tone was. We want to know, was the product, was there a photo attached? So you can actually say, you know, what's really important to me are my key messages. I'm just starting out. I want to make sure that 50% of the coverage you generate for me includes my key messages. Understanding that coverage can often be a mention or just a quote, so not every time is there going to be a key message. But if you can think about what you want to achieve and what's important to you at the time, you can be clear with an agency about what you're hoping to achieve, and they should be flexible enough to be able to come back to you and say, here's what we can do, and here's what it's going to cost. So setting expectations and understanding your criteria, really important. Okay, I think we're almost done. This is my last slide. So we've gone through an awful lot of stuff. We've asked, we've answered, I think, all the questions we set out to at the front, and probably quite a few more. So we're just going to leave you with a few questions. So while not everything we presented today is necessarily applicable to where you're at in your evolution, just a few questions that you can ask yourself when you're thinking about whether or not you're ready to do some public relations. Timing is the first one, obviously. Are you ready? Are you ready to start telling your story, or are you ready to start developing your story? Do you have a story to tell? Is it compelling? Do you know what audiences you want to reach? Do you have someone to tell that story? As David said, do you have a spokesperson that's available, trained, credible? Do you have the right materials, those laundry lists of things? Because once you start that engagement with people, they'll say, great, send me a fact sheet. Great, do you have a backgrounder? Make sure you have all those materials ready. Do you have the right resources? Do you have the right people in place or support people in place to help you reach the audiences you want to reach? And finally, measurement. Have you thought about what you really want to achieve, and are you ready to set that down and measure it? So we've covered a lot. As I said, we really appreciate your attention. It's been a jam-packed hour, but we do have at least 20-25 minutes for questions now, so be happy to take them.
When you're one person or you're very small, you're spending all your time either servicing clients or developing product, or you're asleep at your desk because you were up until 3 a.m. the night before. And so what are your recommendations in terms of being able to put the appropriate amount of attention to laying the foundation? Not just the budget, but also just the headspace and being able to be able to do it.
Okay, well, I think the first recommendation is be, shall we say, ruthless in how you triage what you're going to do. So that means, obviously, as an entrepreneur or an SMB that has, just really themselves or maybe one or two other people, and certainly your case yourself, it's about, okay, what are the absolute essentials that I need? And of the laundry list that we talked about earlier, that can be distilled down a little bit more, right? Like, you don't have to do all the things, right? But there are some critical things that have to be done. I mean, a simple executive bio, a simple corporate backgrounder, and maybe a product overview of what you're selling. Maybe those 3 documents from a content perspective would probably be enough, right? And the reason I mentioned the executive bio is that when you are a very early stage or entrepreneurial company, oftentimes, I think Mary mentioned it, sometimes the more interesting story is about you. It's the human, personal story and not about the product itself, right? You actually provide the air cover to pull your product along. Because everyone loves a story about, the little guy who started the one-man company, who grew to 5, who grew to 10, who's going to take on Bill Gates and Microsoft, right? That's the narrative that a lot of people really like. So in terms of the recommendations on your content, really restricted to just the really key pieces that you need. Do look at your website in terms of, we're not talking about the all singing, all dancing website. It doesn't have to be, a transactional e-commerce site, but make it pretty. Have some pictures, have some basic content areas that we talked about. That's another key area. In terms of getting out there in the launch side of things, in terms of engaging, again, we're not talking about a huge time hog here. Like, if you do issue a press release or a story pitch email, go out there to a very targeted set of folks, right? So again, it's not a shotgun approach. If you're involved in a specific industry, all right, or a specific audience set, be very, very focused on them alone. So there might be 2, 3, 5 influencers that you want to reach out to. So that's much more manageable than 20, 30, or 40, all right? And in terms of time commitment, if there is interest from them, you don't have to clear your schedule for 3 or 4 days afterwards, right? You can actually get some sleep, maybe even go home and get some sleep and not do it under your desk, right? But it is about maybe 15, 20 minutes, like little windows of opportunity. And that's a great thing about interviews, right? Or even lunch meetings. It's maybe a half hour, an hour out of your day. And I know that can still be tough to swing sometimes, but again, it's not, you're not Obama. You're not, the press corps isn't going to be following you around, right? So there are ways to actually manage your time effectively in content, in terms of engagement, and in terms of how much time you have to devote to speaking to influencers, all right? I don't know if it helps.
The only thing I would add to that, just quickly while we're getting to the next question, is to always be thinking about where you can get that content from. So if you're working with a customer, ask them, you know, when we're done this and you know, if you're happy with it, would you be willing to talk to somebody about it or talk to the media? Like, always be thinking about where your content is coming from and asking people how they feel about your work, your company, and engaging them, because then you have those people that you go back to when you need them.
Hey, how you doing?
Hi.
Thanks for your time today, by the way. I'm Sean with MediaU, and we have a startup we're launching in June. So we have our engineering firm with a social media wing. We also have an ad agency where we have a friend on who's going to help us out, as well as what we're doing personally. Is there any problems with having so many different people and getting the message muddled and possibly it being a hindrance to what you're trying to get out there?
Not, I mean, we do this a lot, and so when I talk about one throat to choke, that often means that, you know, we're working with a lot of different people and other agencies. We work for companies where other agencies are responsible. We work with advertising agencies regularly. I think what's important, is getting that foundation right. So if you haven't set your key messages in stone, if you're not sure about your story, that you get whoever you respect around the table to develop that. And if you're absolutely clear with what it is, then you can tell each of those agencies what you need them to do based on that foundation. So often we'll do what's called a creative brief. So we'll go to another agency, whether it's a web developer or an advertising agency, and say, here's what we're trying to achieve, here's the brand profile, here's what the product is about. So come back with something that fits into these brand guidelines, if you will, or messaging guidelines. So it's about getting that foundation right at the start and then making sure everyone adheres to that.
And the one thing I'd add to that too is, I mean, you've probably heard, certainly in the social media space, you know, there's a huge debate over who owns the narrative for your company. Should it be a PR agency? Should it be the advertising agency? Should it be the interactive agency or the digital shop, right? And let me just say that I think from our perspective, maybe our CEO might not like me saying this, but I don't think that we in PR, we're not after world domination in terms of dominating all the other disciplines, right? I think it's for you to work collaboratively and give the direction. So if you think you're getting good advice from your PR folks, or your digital folks, or your advertising folks, or whoever the smart guys around the table are, focus on them and set that key message matrix, and that will again guide all the other agencies to make sure that there is that consistency, right? And don't necessarily be, you know, seduced by one discipline over the other that wants to take ownership of your message. I mean, I think that's key. You gotta trust the people who are advising you, right? And whoever you trust more, obviously you're gonna trust everybody, but you know, who's giving you the best advice in that sense, right?
Hi, I have a bit of a specific question. You talked about, David, about a 6-minute spot on Canada AM for that one company, and then you moved them to the States in the CBS early show. If that was 12 minutes, 6 and 6 for argument's sake, of measured media, very specific question, I don't know whether you can answer it, but how do you value then, if I was the PR client said, you know, I thank you for that, I don't want to pay your retainer next month, and it's $5,000 a month, say. Clearly those 12 minutes were worth more than the $5,000. How do you go back and measure specifically, maybe even independently with the show in Canada and then the show in the States, what the value of that time that CEO was on the, you know, on the boob tube face value at 9 a.m., which you couldn't buy in a 30 or 60 second spot?
Well, put it this way, I mean, you have hit on something. I mean, a traditional, call it old school. The old school measurement is obviously earned media versus paid media, right? And so if you have brand recognition or a spot on broadcast, you know, yeah, you measure the time and you do the math in terms of how much that ad buy would cost if you had a 6-minute or a 12-minute commercial on Canada AM at 8 o'clock in the morning.
It's not really even a commercial, right? Because it's an it's like an it's like an editorial commercial, which is even more valuable.
Well, exactly. Thank you. That's certainly what we think as well. So what we try and do, as Mary mentioned, is rather than focusing, because quite frankly, I've never really been comfortable with that clear sort of, you know, sort of PR ad buy conversion rates. But if you can look at it and say, what are the messages that were delivered, right? What were the product feature sets that were delivered? What's that overall, I guess, message that was delivered? And ultimately, does that help our client, that company, does that help them get in the door of another major grocery retail chain, right? Can they take that segment and say, look at this product, look at our product. It's featured on Canada AM, it's in pilot at a real, live, breathing US grocery chain, right, at a store. And so in some ways, the real value is, does it generate demand for the product, right? Do sales actually increase, right? Do they get more meetings with partners that want to distribute their product? Do they get in the door with new prospects that they otherwise wouldn't have gotten into? So those are some of the qualitative elements, right? I mean, as Mary said, on a quantitative side, I mean, that's frankly a can of worms in terms of all the different things you can do and how much that would cost to do. But to me, it's about making a business impact, right? So it's not necessarily about impression counts, although that's important. It is about, ad conversion rates, but it is also about, is it really making a quantitative as well as a qualitative impact on your business, right? So it's a tough question, frankly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a very interesting presentation. 2 questions. So I'm one of the MaRS staff here, and so I see a lot of the different startups that we work with, and typically very, very young companies. They're in their formative stages, but my personal belief is that PR has a very important role to play, even for those companies, if we can just find an overlap in terms of how little you want to work for and how much they can afford to pay. That said, sort of a very simple question to start with. What's the distinction between the work you do and an advertising agency? I think that would be very useful for a few people. And the other thing is more coming back to the early stage issue. There are some very, very targeted needs that early stage startups have. So they need to get into scientific journals or very narrow industry journals. They need to get acceptance for their technology. It's not even a product at a specific point. Do you even touch that kind of material? Do you write white papers or scientific type material?
You take the first part?
Sure, yeah. I mean, essentially the difference between advertising and public relations is what David said, the difference between earned and paid media. So if you're buying an ad, you're paying for that space. You have complete control over what goes in the paper. Usually there's a fair bit of design costs in designing the ad, and you provide the actual materials to that publication. They place the ad. They're happy to get your money, and you run it as many times as you like. In earned media, what we try to do is earn editorial coverage for you. There are no guarantees. There are, nobody's saying, hey, we really want to write about your client's company. Can you come and talk to us? That's the earned part of the earned media. It's that whole idea of understanding what they're writing about, looking at their editorial calendars, knowing the journalists, saying, hey, you just wrote about this legislative issue last week. You might be really interested in this company that has an interesting take on it. One of the companies we worked with, this Vericent that's doing SPM, which is not the most interesting necessarily, but we knew they did a lot of their business outside of Canada. So we were talking to Canadian business. They were doing a story about the effect of currency fluctuations on Canadian companies. Hey, put those two together. So it's earning an opportunity for your clients to tell their story, or you earning an opportunity for you to tell your story by engaging the right people. And what comes out is editorial, and hopefully it represents you. We have a lot of clients too that often say, do I get to read that story before it gets published? Do I get to check it and correct it? And I always say, imagine what the Globe and Mail would look like if everybody mentioned in it got to edit their own stuff before it went in. So there's a lack of, there's a loss of control, but that means also, because of the editorial independence, that there's an incredible amount of credibility with earned media versus paid.
I think the one thing I'd add too is certainly our advertising brethren do, find work, a lot of great creative stuff, and they should be part of your marketing mix if applicable and at the right time. I think the key thing though is that, let's say traditional advertising is very much a one-way conversation, right? You get the creative dudes to cook up a beautiful, lovely ad that has some really tight messaging and copy. You get it out there and people look at it, they react to it in that sense. Whereas PR is fundamentally, as I mentioned, about the exchange of information and ideas, right? So it really is a two-way, multi-way conversation, and that extends, to social media as well. And so that's something that PR that's our history and our heritage, right? Is managing those conversations, making sure that your message gets through the clutter and all that and throughout that conversation, right? So I think that's one nuance that I would add. So on the specific elements of the early stage companies, all right, and the scientific journals, absolutely, in the sense of they would be a key vertical market, like if it is biotech, for example. I mean, if there are journals or peer review things, or maybe even websites that are focused on that, that would be part of the influencer base that we would definitely reach out to, help map, find messaging that resonates with them, and build relationships with them. So that's something, definitely an element of what we would do. We do write white papers specifically, but let me just say that if you really are a rocket scientist, we don't employ any rocket scientists at H&K, right? So there might be a learning curve for us to interview your scientist and translate that into, yes, preserving the technical rigor of it, but also maybe tell a story. Because, you know, I mean, there may be a lot of important technical elements, but everyone likes to read something interesting, I think, even a rocket scientist maybe, right? And so that's something that we can help with. And maybe that is a bit of a contrast with advertising. A former client of mine at Microsoft, actually, she actually ultimately had us write her ad copy because we were much closer to her product set. We knew her product set inside and out, whereas, again, no disrespect to the advertising guys because, you know, again, respect them fully on the job they do, but you would have a copywriter that could be writing about yogurt in the morning, you know, jeans in the afternoon, and then her software product in the afternoon. And that didn't quite work with her. And so she wanted someone who was a little bit deeper in her stuff to really understand the value proposition of her products, right? And so we can do that, right?
Hi there. I'm with XYZ Interactive Technology. We're a small startup here at MaRS. And we're moving from kind of, we make low-cost gesture sensors. And we're moving from having a technology to getting that technology into a product. And we're kind of determining whether or not we're going down the licensing of our technology road or the selling of our product and individual sensors. Is it better for us to kind of wait a few more months after we've had some more of our licensing discussions, or is there value in kind of engaging in an exercise now?
Okay, make sure.
Do you have other technology types of clients that go through this kind of license versus?
We do actually. We've worked with a company called Project Better Place. I don't know if you've heard of them, but Shai Gassi, who used to be a very senior person at SAP, essentially they are focused on establishing an electric car grid. So they're the guys who are looking at having energy, like battery swap stations and plug-in stations, which will allow the infrastructure so that when you're driving your electric car, right, you have a place to actually recharge or change the battery. And so they did, without getting into all the details, I think there was some similarities there in that they are looking, you know, they have some patents that they were going after, they had some regulatory issues, and of course, some partnership issues that they had to deal with, right, in terms of that. And so their choice certainly was to focus on, you know, an awareness building campaign. You know, it's that sort of grassroots element, and so they did want to go public in the sense of, here's the concept, here's the big idea. Like, could you imagine, right? You know, it's the chicken and egg, right? More electric cars, then we'll build the infrastructure. Well, if there are no electric cars, then we're not going to build the infrastructure, right? So they understood that they need to build some air cover in terms of championing the issue of electric vehicles overall. So they did decide to go out publicly to help generate that awareness. I think I'd probably need to know a little bit more about your case in terms of what the merits, you know, the advantages and the risk and reward of that it is. Like if you have a strategic business decision that says, okay, well, I think we want to license our technology, that is a discussion that we can say, okay, well, here's the bundle of activities, or here's the strategy that we can use to focus on that. If you are looking to actually go commercially, so end user marketplace, then that's the other side of things. But right now, I would say we should have that discussion in terms of where you're leaning, or if you are thinking about conceptually, is there some air cover that can be provided? Like, is it a breakthrough technology, as Mary said? Is it going to change user behavior? Is there something out there where we can elevate the story, create an issue, do a classic issue building kind of approach that affects your product or relates to your product, and then decide where we want to sort of stream our focus and energy? So maybe we can talk a little bit afterwards, because I think, you know, if we get more information about that would be helpful.
Thanks.
That was a lot of content. Mary and David, I want to thank you for galloping through that. And I've got one final question that kind of builds on the last question. Is there ever a time when there's too much PR? Can you be at a stage when it's just too much, or it's not the right time?
Maybe if you're Paris Hilton, I guess. I don't know. But I think what you're getting at is if people are coming to you before you're ready, or there's such an interesting concept that people have heard about that they want to know more about it. And I would just say, you always have to set the agenda yourself. So you don't want the tail wagging the dog. Sometimes people get excited. The media is calling me. I have to respond. I need to do something. Or frankly, they're excited. I'd love to be on that program. I'd love to do this. And I think you have to take a step back either way before you go proactive, or if you're trying to react. Is this the right time? All the same questions. Do I have my story? Do I know what I want to achieve? And if not, then maybe it isn't the right time to talk about it, and to be able to say it's not something I can talk fully about, but you'll be the first to know, when we're ready to launch, I think is quite fine, and we do that as well. Yeah.
Good. That's exactly where I was going with that. Thank you. And thanks to you both for taking the time to do this. I hope you all found that informative. And we'll, of course, have the materials up on our website shortly. So in case you weren't furiously scribbling all of those checklists, we will have that available online. So thanks very much, everyone. And we'll see you again.